In 1944, the state of South Carolina strapped a 14-year-old boy into an electric chair so small they had to use a Bible as a booster seat. George Stinney Jr. was convicted in under 10 minutes by an all-white jury for a crime where zero physical evidence was ever presented against him. 70 years later, a judge would officially declare what everyone already knew. But by then, George had been dead for 7 decades. And the system that killed him had never once looked back. Alcolu, South Carolina. Spring of 1944. The town was literally divided by railroad tracks. White families on one side, black families on the other. George Stinney Jr. was 14. 5'1", 90 pounds. His father worked the local sawmill, which meant the company owned their house and could take it back whenever it wanted. On the afternoon of March 23, 1944, George and his 8-year-old sister Amy were outside with the family's cow when 2 white girls stopped them to ask where they could find maypops, wildflowers. George said he didn't know. The girls walked on. That was the last time anyone outside their families saw Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames alive. When the girls didn't come home, a search party was organized. George and his father joined it. At some point, George mentioned he'd seen the girls that afternoon. One sentence, a boy saying he'd seen 2 kids who asked him about flowers, and that was the thread. The next morning, both girls were found bludgeoned in a water-filled ditch. That afternoon, deputies came to the Stinney home and handcuffed George. His parents weren't there. He was just 14. No lawyer. No parents. No recording. The sheriff later claimed George confessed to the murders and also admitted wanting to have sex with the 11-year-old. That claim was the entire prosecution's case. There was no forensic evidence, no murder weapon, not even a single eyewitness to support this claim. Just a sheriff saying a scared 14-year-old, 90-pound boy told him he did it. And the contents of the confession were never revealed. No written statement, no transcript, nothing signed. It existed only in the sheriff's word. On April 24, 1944, George stood trial in a courthouse his family was not permitted to enter due to racial segregation. His siblings, Amy, Clarence, and Kathleen, had all been with George on the day of the killings. They could have given him an alibi. They were turned away at the door because they were black. His court-appointed attorney was a tax lawyer who had never argued a criminal case in his life. He called 0 witnesses, filed no appeal, and went on to be elected to the state legislature. Now if you are thinking foul play, yes. Apparently, Charles Plowden was a tax commissioner running for office who didn't want to risk being seen as a supporter of civil rights. So it wasn't just incompetence, it was calculated political self-interest. He sacrificed a child's life to protect his electoral chances. The prosecution called 1 witness, the sheriff. The jury deliberated for just 10 minutes. The judge sentenced George to death the same day. His father was fired from the sawmill that night. The family fled under threat of mob violence. On March 26th, a white mob had attempted to lynch George, but failed only because he had already been moved to a jail in a different town. He sat in a cell alone for 81 days. His former cellmate later recalled George asking the same question over and over, "Why would they kill me for something I didn't do?" George Stinney Jr. was so small the electric chair straps didn't fit his body. His tiny head didn't fit the shock helmet. It kept slipping, revealing the tear-stained face of a child. He was the youngest person executed in the United States in the entire 20th century. He was dead before summer. And then something else. Something the history books leave out. Since Stinney's exoneration, a man named George Washington Burke Jr. has become the subject of serious suspicion. His father, George Burke Sr., owned the land where the girls' bodies were found, conducted the initial search, and was the foreman of the grand jury that indicted Stinney. Stinney's sister claimed she had heard the Burke boys framed George because their mother had refused the advances of Burke Sr., and when she stopped coming to work for them, someone needed to pay. George Burke Jr. died in 1947. He was 29. He was never investigated and he was never charged. In January 2014, George's surviving siblings, now in their late 70s, finally testified for the brother they'd lost before they were old enough to vote. Charles Stinney, testifying by video because he was too frail to travel, said, "George's conviction was something our family believed could happen to any of us. Therefore, we made a decision for the safety of the family to leave it be." On December 16, 2014, Judge Carmen Mullen vacated George Stinney's conviction, finding he had been fundamentally deprived of due process, that the confession could not be considered voluntary, that his attorney did little to nothing, and that his constitutional rights had been violated at every stage. She wrote, "I can think of no greater injustice." But she stopped short of declaring him innocent. The murders of Betty June and Mary Emma remain officially unsolved. The man who may have killed them died of natural causes in 1947, and the state of South Carolina has never apologized. George Stinney was exonerated in 2014. He was 14 when he died. He would have been 84. The electric chair that killed him is still on display in Columbia, South Carolina. They call it Old Sparky. It's a tourist attraction. And if you've never heard a case this legally backwards, hit subscribe.